I am so delighted to have Ashley Avis on today to talk about Wild Horses and Wolves. And she's a screenwriter, producer, and director. And her film, Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West, is the best film I have ever seen on wild horses. Just really showing the beauty and then the issues facing the horses in such a beautiful, poetic way. And I knew that when I heard that she was working on a film about wolves, that it was going to be equally as wonderful. And I really see that there is so much parallel between the wolves and the horses. So that's what I wanted to talk to Ashley about today. So please, Ashley, let us know what your journey's been like with the horses and the wolves.
Well, first of all, Carol, thank you for having me on again and for your very kind words. Obviously, Wild Beauty was a massive passion project, and I'm very honored, and I continue to be excited about what it can do. It's been really interesting with the progression of Wild Beauty becoming a tool in classrooms and in Congress. I've gotten a lot of emails since the film has come out. And I think one of the most amazing things about advocacy is a ripple effect. One voice can change the world. You put something out into the universe and who knows who you touch. And Wild Beauty has touched a lot of people. And I've been getting emails from teachers who have said they're showing the film to their students. And obviously we've been to Washington, D.C. a number of times, but the wild horses and that issue has now, I feel like they've really led us to wolves. And we were just chatting about this story, and as you well know, I got led into the wild horse issue through Black Beauty. And I grew up with horses as a kid, had no idea that wild horses were being rounded up until I was in my late 20s when I got a chance to write and direct Black Beauty. And when it ended up on Disney, that film touched millions of people around the world. And then that dovetailed right into our creation of Wild Beauty and trying to make a difference for wild horses. And so in attempting to get the wild horse issue on the radar, I feel like in the wild horse issue, we need more megaphones. We need more big voices. We need celebrity voices stepping in and saying, this is wrong. This is a problem, and using their platforms to help us change this and creating this wave. And I'm and I'm still continuing to try to do that, to get these big voices involved. And it was in writing letters and submitting the film everywhere over the past couple of years. Wild Beauty ended up on the desks of the producers of Leonardo DiCaprio's production company, Appian Way. And we had a meeting, and they were moved by the film and understood what we were trying to do. And they pitched me back a book by Nate Blakesley, American Wolf, which I consumed right away. And I was stunned but not shocked at the similarities between the wild horse issue and the wolf issue. And I knew right away it was one of those feelings. And I've had this feeling 3 times in my life and in my career about something being truly, truly right. And it was the first meeting I took that ended up leading to Black Beauty. It was the moment at the Triple B Roundup in Nevada in 2019, where our crew filmed our first roundup, and the wild horse issue in a different way exploded before my eyes, actually dealing with the BLM and seeing everything that was so blatantly wrong. And then the third time was reading the first chapter of American Wolf. It has to happen. I have to write and direct this. And I hope to God that when I come back to the producers with my take on how to approach the film, hopefully they feel the same way. And it was always already very warm because of Wild Beauty. And then we just got on really well. And the author is so brilliant and so passionate. And it just, and it started flowing. And I feel like sometimes when projects, not that anything's ever easy in trying to create a movie, but when things start to flow kind of like water, you've got to follow that. And that's what it's felt like with all 3 of these projects.
That's amazing. And I think that's part of the magic of wild horses and wolves too, that there is this spiritual component that comes into it. It's not just, this is an animal. Yeah. These are sentient beings. And for you to be open enough to get their message is just amazing and really comes through.
Thank you. I've been meeting all these amazing people that were involved with the original story, the reintroduction in 95 and to the 25 years prior to that, where they were working to try to get wolves reintroduced, people like Norm Bishop. And then I've gotten to meet the amazing biologist Doug Smith, who was such a key figure, not only in American Wolf, but to Wolf Reintroduction, Mike Phillips, the famous Rick McIntyre, who is still in the park virtually every day watching wolves and putting out his amazing books. But I do feel like the wild horses led us to this. And I very much hope that our work now in the wolf space will somehow spiral back into helping the horses. And I'm not sure exactly what that, I've got a couple of ideas about what that could possibly be, but I do think that in some way they're helping each other. And there's this beautiful quote by a man named John Potter. He and his brother were invited to be the first people to come into the park to do a wolf ceremony in 95. And they go back every year to do a ceremony for the wolf in the fall. And he has a beautiful quote, and it goes something like, "The wolves called through me, they called through you, they called through everyone involved in bringing them back." And I think about that, and I'm working on the screenplay for American Wolf right now. So I try to cling to that, because this issue, just like the wild horses, you have moments where you feel like we're going to be able to change this. And you never, I think if you're in this fight, you can never lose that. But there are obviously moments that are hard, and it feels like you're, climbing uphill in the middle of the ocean, trying to reach, a mountain peak while drowning at the same time. And we have those days of doubt and questions. But I do think that when we feel those connections to whether it's the horses or the wolves or both, it's something, it's a calling, for lack of a better word, that we have to keep going.
And, in our wild spaces in the United States, of course, there's something about wild horses and there's something about wolves that just is so inspiring, just spending time with them.
There is. And I had never met a wolf before until American Wolf. And I'm, an all-in personality. It's just like with Wild Beauty. My sweet husband and producing partner, Ed, has gone down the rabbit hole with me for wild horses and now for wolves. But right after I read American Wolf, you have to display passion as a director. And, I was genuinely interested in the subject and just immediately wanted to do it. But then you think, oh gosh, was this sent to another writer? And there was actually a very famous writer that was originally attached to the project. But I told Ed after I finished the book, I said, we've got to go to Yellowstone. I've got to meet some of these people. And so, but and the producers were really happy that I ended up doing that and just showing that level of commitment. But getting to see some of the wolves in the wild is spectacular. And then we've gone up to sanctuaries like Wolf Connection in Acton, and John Kalfa over there was really generous, and his whole team. And we got to go into some of the habitats and actually sit down and be amongst wolves. And if you've never met a wolf or seen a wolf up close before, just like with a wild horse, there's this completely different energy and spirit that just immediately, it's like it's an elemental force that goes through you when you make that connection. And that's what happened with the wolves. And there was one particular white wolf at Wolf Connection that she came right up to me and put her nose to my nose, and there was no sense of fear or it was just a complete sense of calm. And it was the day before we left for Washington, D.C. to do an event that we put together called A Cry for the Wild. And it was like this moment of just saying, you're on the right path to me.
Yeah. The connection with them is everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that in our world today, we're so involved with so many of us, especially kids, are inside, or, you look around at a restaurant with families all on their phones and not talking. I feel like we're in this kind of tipping point as a species, as humans, where we're losing that connection, and we're kind of ingraining something else into ourselves. And I think in some ways, COVID obviously was horrible, but people were starting to get outside and go into nature again. And I don't know what it's going to take, but I'm trying, and we all have our different skill sets. Mine
Yes.
is to try to tell stories. And so I'm hoping, just like with Wild Beauty, with American Wolf, it encourages people to go out into these wild places, because, obviously you very well know an interaction with a wild horse, experiences like that, they can shape your whole life. And we've seen that now too with some of the mentees that I've got through Wild Beauty these young people that either saw Black Beauty and then started getting involved with wild horses and spearheading letter writing campaigns with their classes. It's I feel like we can all do our part to try to remember to try to encourage people to remember to get out into the wild, and that those experiences are important, and that inspires our love and hopefully our desire to protect those places.
Right. And then the other aspect of it is the visual aspect in films and also on social media that, some people can't get out there. And so being able to draw them in and let them experience what you've experienced and what other people have experienced, I think that's just so amazing. And I think it has a lot to do with how many people now are wild horse supporters who never have had an opportunity to go out to Wyoming or California or Nevada. And so I think film is such a special way to capture that for people who care.
Absolutely. It's like reading a novel. I'm working on a project that's set in Paris now, and I've finally been able to go as of this year to experience that city. But if you can't experience a place physically, there are methods of transportation, through your mind and through your imagination, and filmmaking is definitely it is transportive, and maybe it inspires somebody who might not be able to get out to Anarchy, go to a sanctuary and maybe volunteer, or so yes, the immersive nature of film is, I'm really excited to bring that to American Wolf. We've talked about the film kind of like an Into the Wild meets the scale and scope of The Revenant. And if you remember Into the Wild, there's so much immersion in that film, and just the way that your mind starts shifting as you're taking in nature. And even and it links to true experience, trying to infuse these themes into our movies, with Wild Beauty, the first time we were able to spend 3 or 4 weeks in the wild, because we cobbled together money to go shoot it as we went, and sometimes it was a couple of days, and then eventually we did a couple of much longer stretches. And your whole body starts to shift when you spend enough time out there, and that's also what I'm hoping to relay to people through our projects in film.
And I would say wolves they're in a much more dire situation than our wild horses even. And so the immediacy of needing to get the word out and needing to get people to sign on is even more urgent.
I agree. I mean, the precarious nature of the wolf, and then the way that people still see, just labeling them as predators. When I started diving into American Wolf, I ended up speaking to, all of these amazing people that have become confidants with wild horses, from Eric Mulvar to Delia Malone in Colorado, and just trying to learn everything I could as quickly as possible to fully understand the world of the wolves and the politics that was involved, and reading this massive stack of books up to my knee, trying to educate myself on the issue before I got into actually writing the screenplay, because that authenticity and making sure those details were right was so important. And the death of '06 in 2012, and how famous she was, and the tourism that she brought into the park, and the stories that Rick McIntyre told about her as this conduit into the world of the wolves, inspired national and global outrage. And that's what we need for wild horses. But with
Yes.
wolves, her story galvanized Congress in 2015 to say, no, we're not going to delist wolves nationwide. And obviously there's been toggling on and off, and just, basically a disaster for wolves ever since. But going back to today, earlier this year, when I was doing a research trip for American Wolf up in Yellowstone, I had heard about Jonas Black, this celebrity dog trainer, going around and doing this rally for the wolf that most of us know what happened. This young wolf got run over by a snowmobile in Daniel, Wyoming. This guy named Cody Roberts taped her mouth shut and brought her into a bar. And then he paraded her around, idiotically putting that up on social media, but also, thankfully, in a horrible way, what a gift that he made such a fatal error. And that poor wolf has now inspired outrage. And while we were doing that scouting trip for American Wolf, I found out about that rally and that Jonas was going to be in Daniel, Wyoming. And so I reached out to some of the organizers. We got in touch. My sweet husband and I ended up diverting from our route to go to Bozeman. We ended up down in Daniel, Wyoming, and we went to that rally. And you've seen Wild Beauty, and we've talked so many times about the horses and the ghastliness of some of those elements. And I've been undercover into the auction world in Texas, which was nerve-wracking. Driving into Daniel that morning, knowing the bar and the small town were barricaded with horse trailers, because we actually drove in from the opposite direction from the rally. Ed and I came in at dawn this way. They were coming up this way. And so we gave them all a heads up that they had barricaded the Green River Bar and they had barricaded the town and people were outside.
Wow.
And then yeah, it was wild. I've never seen something not quite like that. And not to, I think it's different than the wild horse issue, but we went and we met the caravan and we followed them in and we were filming and we had a drone in the air, which we weren't sure if it was going to get shot out of the sky. We talked about it and it had insurance, but thankfully we had a police escort and, everybody was safe. But driving into Daniel, my heart was racing out of my chest in a way that I was really worried something bad was going to happen. And, with a background as a journalist, you have to put yourself into certain situations and you have to take those bold steps. And thankfully, I do have a husband that keeps me on, a little bit of a balloon string when I get a little bit too passionate about maybe doing something that edges the line of being dangerous. But Daniel that day was explosive. And, it was kind of a microcosm for the level of not only hatred, but this misplaced fear and lack of understanding for
Yes.
wolves. And this, as Eric Mulvar puts it, I won't complete this because there's a curse word in it, but there's this echo chamber of BS surrounding wolves and wild horses, leading to just this ingrained refusal to look at science. And
Right.
that was really kind of wrapped up in a bow with what we experienced that day in that peaceful protest.
And as you know, I live in Colorado, and we've had the wolf introduction debacle, as people are describing it, with the wolves that were released, and then people in the area campaigning to get rid of them, and one of the wolves dying. And it's just been horrible. And Colorado is a pretty progressive state, yet still in a lot of areas, people are afraid. They were talking about the wolves chasing people down and all these lies and terrible things. And I was just shocked by the level of just fear and rage and wanting to get rid of them. And it's just not what we need. And it's not appropriate to what the wolves are. So, and the same thing with the wild horses. It's just characterizing them as destroying our public lands is such an exaggeration and such a lie. And so standing up in the face of that takes a lot of courage.
Thank you. Well, I'm very hopeful. It's going to take time to debunk such a long instilled myth and the fable, obviously, of the big bad wolf and this fear that wolves are just going to take over. And, some of the quotes that I've read just doing research on American Wolf about, there was I forget where he was. I think he was from Wyoming, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. There was a senator that told a group of kids that wolves were going to kill them or eat them, or just like this level of just blatant lying what's scarier is that I think it's just, you grow up ingrained in something like that and you believe it blindly and you don't even feel like you feel like you're peddling the truth.
Right.
And I don't think we're going to change everybody's minds. I think, and one of my favorite things to do is to try to connect with children. And that's what we do with Wild Beauty and comparing and contrasting to Black Beauty, especially with younger kids. But I think it's going to take trying to rejigger the minds of a certain generation, and then starting with the kids and trying to, one of my dreams through our small foundation, we're too small to really do it quite yet, but I'd love to see an educational program that's nationwide that talks about, it's like we've been calling it Wild Horse Week, but something that, why are we not educating kids? Why is it not a requirement to educate children about the environment? But at a bigger scale, and in some of these Western states where that type of material might not necessarily jive with what's going on at home, I think it's critical that children are given the opportunity to understand the truth and the science, and not some of these long instilled fables that perpetuate generation after generation.
That makes complete sense. And I think one of the reasons that more people aren't doing things with children is because I think people thought, as I did when I first got started, being a wild horse advocate, that we would fix this in a few years. But it's not a few year fix. This is a long haul. And if you're talking about changing the minds and changing the way people look at wild horses and wolves, it's a long process. And of course, starting with children who can understand makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been beautiful to see, giving even a 15-20 minute talk with kids and showing them the beauty of wild horses and talking about why they're important. And I'd like to, and I'm sure we will do that for wolves. It's amazing to see how quickly they grasp on. And I think it's probably also talking about long instilled themes. Our relationship with horses is also so ingrained. And I think that there's this kind of inset connection, whether you get to spend time with horses or you live in a city, and there's a draw that we have to them. And so, yeah, so that's where I feel my place is to create as much content as I can in this space, which does feel like a calling, and to connect with kids while being active for legislation that's prevalent now. I think obviously that two-pronged approach is critical. So, and for wolves, I know that there's the Snowmobiles Aren't Weapons Act that's come out with Nancy Mace spearheading that, and then I hope I don't get this wrong, the Tribal Heritage Act, that's wolves, grizzlies, and bison. And I know Western Watersheds Project's very involved with that. So, but I don't know why there isn't something federal that, and I know the complications that come with this, that it would be encompassing of snaring and trapping and all these other things, but how there isn't some kind of federal legislation about torturing wildlife that could also be encompassing in some way, if you were crafty about it, for wild horses, because the helicopters are torture. I mean, putting them through agony for hours on end, and everything we know that comes from that, and breaking legs and necks. And I mean, how is that not torture? How are we not defining that as torture? How are we not defining using a snowmobile to run down a sentient animal? How is that not torture? And even one of the script notes that I had in American Wolf was, I had language about torture and legalizing torture, essentially, when there was this whole kind of political fiasco where the new director of Fish and Wildlife, in I think it was 2011 or 2012, he was basically leveraged into using his position to throw wolves under the bus in Wyoming, to strip them from their ESA status in Wyoming. And I have the speech in that section of the script about, this is nuts. How is Wyoming's wolf management plan encompassing 85% of the state and allowing virtually indiscriminate killing through any means, a snowmobile, gutting them down by helicopter, bombing the dens? I mean, how is that not considered torture? And how is there not something that at a federal level that disallows that? Why is somebody like Cody Roberts not receiving a really big fine and some jail time for torturing a wolf? I mean, so that's one of the things I'd like to see, if in some way we could figure out that, and that would be a huge swing legislatively. Yes. Huge, but that's kind
of even with the wild horses, you can say the helicopters are torture and the horses get injured and killed, But even in holding afterward, so many horses die. So many horses are standing around in pens for the rest of their lives. How is that not considered torture, or at the very least abuse? It's all of one. And yeah, I think it's so important, the legislative work that you've been doing with this too, and getting the word out and telling people that they need to talk to their senators and their representatives, because that is really the only way that we have any sort of leverage in this fight.
Absolutely. And it was amazing the last time. We've been in DC a number of times now over the past few years with the film, doing screenings for mostly staff, but some members of Congress personally. And the last time we went, we were fortunate that Diane Lane saw the movie and reached out, and she said, "What can I do? This is wrong." And she was so passionate about it. And that was such a wonderful moment that somebody kind of answered the call, but she ended up seeing it through some other serendipitous connections. But she said, "How can I help?" And she's been to DC lobbying for different things for the shark fin bill, and was successful with that. And she wanted to get on board, and did get on board with Congresswoman Titus's bill, the Wild Horse and Burro Protection Act. And so we went in, when was that? April of this year. And we visited 25 congressional offices and met with a lot of personal members. And, but I think it's going to take some of those celebrities to help open those doors, because
Yes.
the minute the doors are open, I love launching into that. You've got 10 or
Yes.
15 minutes to try to change their minds.
Exactly.
And I'm so passionate about it. And she was so gracious. She just basically, set the stage for us to have some success. And we got a number of co-sponsors after that trip. But what was also amazing, and this goes back to the kids and kind of cutting through the noise, because obviously there's so much happening in our world. But a few days before we left for that DC trip, a friend of mine in Topanga, California, has some wild horses. And I had connected with someone that runs a program called Foster Warriors, and it's inspiring at-risk foster youth through Marines and doing all sorts of unique activities that can inspire them in various ways. And so we basically brought this amazing group of foster youth to a wild horse sanctuary in Topanga, and looking at and discussing how these horses have gone through incredible trauma, and they've lost their families and their homes and their freedom. And these young people had gone through also incredible trauma. And it was unbelievable to see the transformation of those kids, because some of them came in and, as a filmmaker, I'm fascinated with expression and idiosyncrasy, and especially human kind of physicality. And some of those children were, very internal, to the point where, their shoulders were hunched, or they couldn't look you in the eye, and very shy. And then a little time, an afternoon with wild horses, and those kids came alive. I mean, it was just it was like witnessing a transformation. And at the end of that day, because we were headed to DC, I asked them if anyone wants to participate in our letter writing campaign, if I'm going to hand deliver these postcards to DC. And I asked them to write to Congressman Schiff. And he signed on to that bill a couple of days after I brought those letters in. And when I went into the office, I mean, what these kids wrote was unbelievable. But there was one letter in particular that would have just broken your heart. This young woman who tied the trauma to the horses she met and their stories to her story with her family. And in a single postcard, you would be on the floor weeping. And I put that one on the very top. And I walked into the office and I said, please, and I met with his staff, but I said, please, if the congressman reads just one, read this one. And then we saw his name pop up on the bill a few days later. And it was just like, finally, something, because we need those successes. But it was just such an example to me that kids do cut through the noise. Sincerity really cuts through the noise, and storytelling cuts through the noise. So that's, and I want to keep doing more of that. So we're starting to quietly plan another event for that bill for the horses in DC next year, and discussing, how we move things forward for wolves as well.
That's great. That's absolutely wonderful. You are such an inspiration, Ashley, and I so appreciate your willingness to talk to me about this, and let my listeners know about what you're up to right now. And the best of luck with American Wolf.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for all that you do to raise awareness through the beauty of your art. You've been such a friend to me and to the horses, and I'm grateful to know you. Thanks.
Thank you.